Hello everyone. I have a list of your questions right here, so let's answer them. I'll answer some of them now and the rest of them next week. First, a question from Nick. How to shoot low-key portraits or bodyscapes. I always struggle with this type of lighting. This is one of my favorite ways to shoot. I have done a few SnapChick shoots using low-key lighting. My basic advice is to grab one light. I particularly like to use continuous light for this type of photography so that I can see exactly where the light is hitting the subject. Keep the ambient light in the room low, though you may need some ambient light to help you autofocus. Switch your camera over to manual and set your shutter speed fast enough to prevent motion blur. A good rule of thumb here is to use the inverse of your focal length. So if you are shooting at 85 millimeters, shoot at 1/85th of a second. 50 millimeter lens, 1/50th of a second. Then set your aperture, possibly to the widest that you can with your lens. This will also depend upon the depth of field you're looking for. So then when you figured those two things out, you'll be able to start increasing your ISO sensitivity until you have the illuminated portion of your subject properly exposed. You may also want to move your light closer or farther from the subject, possibly even change the power of it, but take it slow. Make one change to your setup, test it, and then move to your next adjustment, rather than changing several things at once and then not really knowing which made the difference in the photo. Changing one thing at a time is also just crucial to learning. You'll figure things out that way. And then once you get your settings pretty much nailed down, it's a matter of moving your light around and positioning your subject to get the effect that you want. But don't be afraid to experiment. I am completely self-taught in studio photography through trial and error. I don't mind making mistakes. To me, it's an important part of the learning process. Macro Chester asks, do you ever hire models? What do you pay? I do hire models for my work as SnapChick sometimes. Pay depends on their experience and the work. It can be $100 or several hundred. Even more if there is a paid third-party sponsor for the video. Something I always do, though, is pay extra if I'm happy with their work, especially if I want to work with them again. Ken, how or when do you use the electronic front curtain shutter for long exposure? Electronic front curtain shutter is basically where the shutter opens and then the sensor is activated, rather than the sensor being activated as the shutter is opening. The purpose is to prevent blur from the vibration of the shutter actually opening. Nikon also recommends you use it in combination with mirror up mode, a tripod, and even a remote release when you're using this to prevent blur. Times when you would want to use it might include when you're using a telephoto lens, but you don't want to or can't use a fast shutter speed, or when you're doing microscope photography. Tony wants to know, have you thought of doing a workshop in the UK? I have considered doing some sort of workshop, but most likely closer to home. And the last one for today. Roger says, any tips or advice for shooting events with a lot of people? I'll be shooting an event for a 1-year-old's birthday soon, but I was told that there will be 100 plus people attending. Also, with group shots, should I still be using single point autofocus? If so, where should I put the focus point? Thanks. Gear-wise, I suggest having backup everything. Backup body, backup lenses, extra batteries, and memory cards. I prefer to work a room with one camera, something with a lens that gives me some flexibility, but I want all that backup. As for autofocus, that kind of depends on how you prefer to shoot. I most often use single point autofocus, but if there's another mode that you're more comfortable using, that's fine too. As for where to put the autofocus point, you have more depth of field behind the subject, so focus on someone near the front. However, remember to adjust your aperture to something narrow enough to have everyone in focus. This will depend upon your focal length and the distance to your subject. You can, however, play around with a depth of field calculator to see what happens at different apertures and distances to kind of prepare yourself. That's it for today. I will be back next week with more of your questions. In the meantime, you can see more of my Q&A videos in the playlist above.